The lecture hall door exploded inward with a thunderous crash that sent every student diving under their desks except one. Sarah Michelle kept her pencil moving across the calculus final, her hand steady as combat boots pounded against linoleum and tactical gear rattled through the aisles. While her classmates whimpered and cowered, she calmly erased an equation and rewrote it with perfect precision. Professor Williams had dropped behind his podium, his gray hair barely visible as he trembled and shouted for everyone to stay down. The other students pressed themselves against the floor, backpacks clutched like shields, some crying softly as they watched black-clad figures sweep through their sanctuary of learning with military efficiency. 6 Navy SEALs moved through the rows with weapons at ready position, their faces hidden behind tactical masks, scanning each terrified face with professional intensity. Their leader raised his fist, bringing the team to an immediate halt as they assessed the civilian population before them. Sarah finished the last problem on page 3 and flipped to the next section, completely unfazed by the chaos surrounding her. Her breathing remained controlled, her posture upright and alert, but not alarmed, as if armed military personnel interrupting final exams was merely another Tuesday inconvenience. The contrast between her composure and everyone else's panic was striking and impossible to ignore. The SEAL team leader stopped dead in his tracks when his eyes locked on Sarah's face. He lowered his weapon immediately and pulled off his tactical mask, revealing weathered features that carried years of combat experience. His voice cut through the terrified silence with unmistakable respect. "Falcon." The single word hit the lecture hall like a lightning strike. Sarah's pencil finally stopped moving as every head in the room turned toward her with expressions of complete bewilderment. Her classmates who had huddled next to her during study sessions, who knew her as the quiet girl who always sat in the third row, stared in absolute shock. The SEAL commander stepped forward and executed a crisp salute that his entire team immediately mirrored. 6 of the most elite warriors in the world stood at attention before a college student in jeans and a university sweatshirt, showing the kind of deference usually reserved for high-ranking officers. Sarah slowly set down her pencil and met the commander's gaze with recognition flickering in her eyes. The girl who tutored struggling freshmen in algebra, who lived on instant ramen and coffee, who worried about her economics midterm, suddenly carried herself differently. Her posture shifted subtly but unmistakably into something that matched the respect being shown to her. Professor Williams peered over his podium with his mouth hanging open, trying to process how his most unassuming student had just commanded the immediate attention and obvious reverence of a Navy SEAL team. The silence stretched unbearably as Sarah rose from her desk with fluid grace that belonged more on a military parade ground than in a college lecture hall. Her classmates remained frozen, their minds struggling to reconcile the girl who shared her highlighters with a legendary figure commanding such profound respect from America's most elite warriors. Commander Blake kept his salute steady until Sarah gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Only then did the SEAL team lower their hands, but their posture remained respectfully rigid. The other students began whispering frantically to each other, their voices creating a buzz of confusion and disbelief that filled the academic space. "Sarah, we have a situation that requires your immediate expertise." The commander's voice carried urgency beneath its respectful tone. "A terrorist cell has acquired experimental aircraft from Nellis. Conventional forces have failed to stop them. We need Falcon operational within the hour." Jenny Martinez, who sat behind Sarah in every math class, finally found her voice. "Sarah, what is happening? Who is Falcon?" Her question echoed what everyone was thinking as they stared at their study partner with new eyes. Sarah glanced around the room at faces she knew well, people who had become her friends over 2 years of shared academic struggles. Her carefully constructed civilian identity was crumbling with each passing second, and there was no way to put that particular secret back in its box. Sarah looked at Commander Blake with resignation settling across her features. "How many aircraft?" Her voice had changed completely, carrying the crisp authority that belonged to someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions rather than multiple-choice questions. 3 F-35s stolen from Nellis Air Force Base 6 hours ago. The terrorists have already used one to destroy a civilian airport in Nevada. Intelligence suggests they're planning coordinated strikes on major population centers. Blake's briefing was delivered with military precision as students continued staring in stunned silence. Professor Williams slowly emerged from behind his podium, adjusting his glasses with trembling hands. "Sarah, I don't understand. You're a mathematics major. You've never mentioned any military background." His academic world was clearly being turned upside down by revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about his quiet, dedicated student. Sarah Michelle Thompson had been the perfect cover identity for 2 years. She attended every lecture, completed every assignment, and maintained a respectable grade point average while living the carefully constructed life of an ordinary college student. But her real name was Captain Sarah Mitchell, and before she walked away from military service, pilots throughout the Air Force had whispered stories about the legendary aviator known as Falcon. The commander checked his watch with growing urgency. "Ma'am, we're running out of time. Every minute we delay gives them more opportunity to reach populated areas." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, the transformation was complete. The hesitant college student had vanished, replaced by the combat pilot who had earned her legendary status through impossible missions that others wouldn't even attempt. She grabbed her backpack and moved toward the door with purposeful strides. "Wait, Sarah, please." Jenny's voice cracked with desperation. "We don't understand what's happening. Are you really leaving in the middle of finals?" Her classmates watched in bewilderment as their study partner prepared to walk away from 2 years of academic work without a backward glance. Commander Blake fell in a step beside her, briefing her as they moved. The stolen F-35s are equipped with advanced stealth technology and air-to-ground missiles. Our best pilots couldn't get close enough to engage them effectively. The terrorists have training, and they know our standard tactics. We need someone who can think outside conventional parameters. Sarah nodded grimly. She had built her reputation by succeeding in situations where traditional approaches failed, by finding solutions that existed in the narrow spaces between impossible and inevitable. Her academic life had been a peaceful interlude, but some responsibilities couldn't be permanently abandoned. Professor Williams called after them desperately. "But what about your calculus final? Sarah, you were on track to graduate summa cum laude." The absurdity of his concern in the face of national crisis highlighted just how completely her two worlds had collided. The Black Hawk helicopter waited on the university soccer field, its rotors spinning at idle as campus security tried to manage the growing crowd of students who had emerged from dormitories and classrooms to witness the unprecedented scene. Sarah paused at the aircraft door and looked back at the lecture hall one final time, knowing that her carefully protected civilian existence was ending forever. Commander Blake handed her a flight suit and tactical gear. "Your F-22 is fueled and ready at Peterson Air Force Base. We've cleared airspace from here to Colorado, and you'll have full tactical support once airborne. The terrorists are moving south toward Los Angeles, estimated arrival in 90 minutes." Sarah began changing into her flight gear with practiced efficiency, her movements sharp and confident. The college sweatshirt and jeans were replaced by the uniform that had always felt more natural than any civilian clothing ever could. As she zipped up the flight suit, years of peaceful anonymity fell away completely. Jenny had followed them outside and stood at the edge of the security perimeter with tears streaming down her face. "Who are you really?" she shouted over the helicopter noise. Sarah met her friend's eyes across the distance and saw the pain of betrayal mixed with wonder and fear. "I'm someone who saves people," Sarah called back, then climbed into the aircraft. The Black Hawk lifted off immediately, carrying her toward a confrontation that would either end in victory or catastrophic failure for millions of innocent Americans. The F-22 Raptor felt like coming home as Sarah's hands moved across familiar controls with muscle memory that 2 years of academic life couldn't erase. Peterson Air Force Base Tower cleared her for immediate takeoff as she ran through pre-flight checks with lightning speed, her mind already calculating intercept vectors and engagement protocols. Falcon, this is Control. We have the 2 remaining F-35s on radar heading southwest at Angels 20. They're maintaining radio silence and ignoring all attempts at communication. Your intercept window is 37 minutes before they reach populated areas. Sarah pushed the throttles forward and felt the massive engines respond instantly, launching her aircraft into the Colorado sky with tremendous acceleration. The familiar sensation of forces pressing against her body awakened instincts that had been dormant, but never forgotten during her civilian hibernation. Ground radar shows they're flying in tight formation, likely planning synchronized strikes on multiple targets. Standard intercept protocols have failed because they know our tactics. Sarah's voice over the radio carried the cold professionalism that had made her legendary among military aviators. She banked hard to the south, her aircraft screaming through thin mountain air as she pushed the F-22 to its operational limits. Every second counted now, and failure would mean catastrophic loss of civilian life. The mathematics she had been studying seemed trivial compared to the life-and-death calculations filling her mind as she closed the distance toward her targets. Sarah spotted the 2 stolen F-35s at 12 o'clock, flying in perfect formation as they approached the outskirts of Los Angeles. Her radar warning receiver remained silent, confirming that their stealth systems were fully operational and making conventional intercept nearly impossible for standard pilots. Falcon has visual contact. 2 F-35s bearing Tusavenzaro, altitude 20,000 feet. They're maintaining formation discipline. These aren't amateurs. Sarah's assessment was delivered with clinical precision as she maneuvered into position above and behind the terrorist aircraft. The lead F-35 suddenly broke left while his wingman rolled right, splitting their formation in a coordinated defensive maneuver that revealed professional military training. Sarah had anticipated this exact response and was already diving between them, using their own separation against them. Her first missile lock achieved tone on the trailing aircraft. Fox 2. The AIM-9X Sidewinder streaked away from her F-22 and found its target with devastating accuracy. The stolen F-35 erupted in a fireball that briefly illuminated the desert landscape below. The remaining terrorist pilot immediately went defensive, throwing his aircraft into a series of violent maneuvers designed to break missile lock and create separation. But Sarah had flown against the best pilots in the world, and she knew every defensive tactic in existence. She stayed locked onto her target with predatory patience, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what had started in a college lecture hall. The final terrorist pilot was good, but Sarah was legendary for a reason. She matched his every defensive maneuver while slowly tightening the engagement envelope, using techniques that existed only in classified training programs and combat experience that couldn't be taught in any flight school. Falcon, be advised the target is approaching Los Angeles airspace. You have 90 seconds before civilian air traffic creates complications. Control's voice carried barely controlled urgency as millions of lives hung in the balance below. Sarah pulled her F-22 into an impossible vertical climb that should have stalled the aircraft, then rolled inverted and dove directly at the stolen F-35 in a heat-and attack that violated every rule of engagement. The terrorist pilot, shocked by the suicidal-appearing maneuver, broke defensive positioning for a split second. That split second was all Sarah needed. Her final missile achieved lock and fired at point-blank range. Fox 2, target destroyed. The explosion lit up the sky as debris scattered across empty desert miles from any populated area. Falcon, outstanding work. All threats neutralized. Control's relief was audible as Sarah began her return flight toward Peterson Air Force Base. The crisis that had interrupted her calculus final was over, but she knew the real consequences were just beginning. Her secret life was blown forever, and there would be no returning to the anonymity of college mathematics. The world now knew that Falcon was still operational, still legendary, and still capable of saving lives when conventional forces failed. News vans surrounded the university campus as Sarah's helicopter touched down on the same soccer field where her civilian life had ended hours earlier. The story of the mysterious pilot called Falcon, who had saved Los Angeles from terrorist attack, was already dominating every news channel across the country. Jenny and her other classmates waited behind the security perimeter, their faces showing mixtures of awe, confusion, and hurt. The girl they had known as a struggling math student who worried about pop quizzes had just prevented a national catastrophe with skills that defied comprehension. Commander Blake escorted Sarah across the field as reporters shouted questions and camera crews documented every step. She still wore her flight suit, and the confident bearing of someone who had just completed an impossible mission showed in every movement. Sarah stopped at the security line where her former classmates waited. Professor Williams stepped forward first, his academic composure completely shattered. I watched the news coverage. They're calling you the greatest combat pilot of this generation. You've been sitting in my calculus class for 2 years, and I never knew. Jenny pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. Why didn't you trust us? Why couldn't you tell us who you really were? Her voice carried the pain of friendship built on what now felt like deception, even though she was beginning to understand the magnitude of Sarah's sacrifice in trying to live a normal life. Sarah looked at the faces of people who had become her friends during 2 years of carefully constructed normalcy. I wanted to be someone other than a weapon for once. I wanted to solve math problems instead of life-and-death situations. I wanted friends who knew me as Sarah the student, not Falcon the legend. The crowd of students had grown larger as word spread across campus. They pressed against the security barriers, trying to get closer to the person who had been sitting among them in lecture halls and study groups, while carrying the weight of abilities that belonged in military legend. A black SUV pulled up near the helicopter, and a 4-star general emerged wearing full dress uniform. Sarah snapped to attention automatically as General Patricia Hayes approached, the same woman who had personally recruited her for the most classified missions in Air Force history. Captain Mitchell, the president wants to see you in Washington tomorrow. Your country needs Falcon operational again. The general's words carried the weight of national necessity that Sarah had hoped to escape forever by disappearing into academic anonymity. Sarah glanced one final time at her former classmates, at Jenny's tear-streaked face, at Professor Williams still clutching the calculus final she would never complete. Her transformation from hidden student to revealed hero was complete, but the cost was measured in relationships that could never be the same again. The girl who had shared textbooks and study sessions was gone forever, replaced by the legendary pilot the world now knew as Falcon. 6 months later, Sarah walked across the same campus that had once been her sanctuary from the world of military operations and classified missions. But now students stopped and stared as she passed, whispering about the legend who had lived among them in secret for 2 years. The university had named a scholarship in her honor, and her photograph hung in the engineering building alongside other distinguished alumni. She was no longer the anonymous girl who worried about calculus grades and shared highlighters with struggling classmates. Jenny approached her near the library steps, carrying the same backpack she had used during their study sessions. I finally understand why you couldn't tell us. The weight of being responsible for saving lives, of having those kind of skills, it must have been lonely beyond anything we could imagine. Sarah smiled sadly. I traded the hardest job in the world for what I thought was the easiest, but hiding who you really are turns out to be the most difficult mission of all. She looked across the campus where her carefully constructed normal life had crumbled in a single morning when duty called. The general's car waited at the campus entrance, ready to take her to another classified briefing for another impossible mission that only Falcon could complete. Sarah had learned that some people aren't meant for ordinary lives, no matter how desperately they might want them. Her legend had grown beyond anything she could have imagined, but the girl who just wanted to solve math problems and make friends would always remain part of who she was underneath the warrior reputation.